Oleg was born and raised in Ukraine. He has been a teacher, a translator, a freelance journalist, and at one time a propaganda artist, if you can believe that. If you've seen his artwork, it's awesome. Creating graphical agitprop for the local party committee in Siberia, and that's going to be one of my questions, Oleg, is how did you end up in Siberia? But yeah, because I always envision people in USR ending up in Siberia because it's a one-way ticket to nowhere or to meeting your maker. So you'll have to tell us about that. In 1994, Oleg, he immigrated to the USA hoping to live in a country that was ruled by reason and common sense. I know. Yeah, it's, you know, the streets weren't paved in gold, were they? Ironically, he now lives in New York City. We pray for him. He is the creator of thepeoplescube.com. I encourage all of you to go to thepeoplescube.com, and we're going to do another shout-out for that, I'm sure, again for you. He has his books for sale. It is Shakedown Socialism, $12. Get an autographed copy of his book. I'm going to introduce you. Oleg, and I'm going to say your name, hopefully, Atbashian. Is that correct? I did a good job. Woo!
The headline from the New York Times in the 30s when one of the leftist journalists went to the Stalinist Soviet Union, and when he returned, he wrote an article titled, "I have seen the future and it works." I've written an article now that says, "I have seen the future and I ran away." So now I'm beginning to feel more as if I had taken a time machine from the future into the past. And now, as a man from your future, I feel an obligation to share my experience and to tell you about what lies ahead, to prepare my American comrades for the transition to this progressive society. One of my favorite political jokes in the Soviet Union was called the 6 Contradictions of Socialism in the USSR. And they are as follows. There is no unemployment, yet no one is working. No one is working, yet the production quotas are fulfilled. The production quotas are fulfilled, yet the shelves in the stores are empty. The shelves are empty, yet everybody has everything at home. Everybody has everything at home, yet everyone is complaining. Everyone is complaining, yet the voting is always unanimous. Now, after having lived here for a while, I thought that perhaps I could make a similar joke about the 6 contradictions of socialism in the United States. And these are the ones that I could find. America is capitalist and greedy, yet half of the population is subsidized. Half of the population is subsidized, yet they think they're victims. They think they're victims, yet their representatives run the government. Their representatives run the government, yet the poor keep getting poorer. The poor keep getting poorer, yet they have things that people in other countries can only dream about. And they have all those things that people in other countries can only dream about, yet they want America to be more like those other countries. Thank you. Thank you. When I was little, I believed in all the fairy tales the teachers and the media and the movies told me about communism. I thought it would be such a great society where we would not have to worry about money, where some entity will take care of all our needs. It would be something like an extended childhood. What's not to like? And eventually the entire country, as I was growing up, I realized that it looked like one big kindergarten, where the supervisors were taking care of all the people who were treated as little children. And eventually, at first it was nice, but then as I was growing up, I was still being treated like an irresponsible kid. I was getting tired of it, so I started questioning this system. And I began to notice corruption and hypocrisy on all levels. And at first I attributed it, as many, to the wrong implementation of the great idea. But then, and a lot of people make that mistake, eventually, as I began to realize more, I figured that it was the idea itself that was the problem, not the implementation. And when I came into the United States, I noticed that there are people here who believe that the idea is still great, they just screwed it up in Russia because there was something wrong with the Russians. Then they screwed it up in China because there was something wrong with them. They screwed it up in Cuba, and then screwed it up in Vietnam, and they screwed it up anywhere. So I'm wondering where can communism not be screwed up? Maybe in Antarctica, where all the penguins look alike, and they look very much like subjects for living in a communist society. I couldn't figure out a few things about America. And of course, I came to New York, which was like a big liberal bubble. And I was reading the New York Times, listening to the NPR, and I just didn't realize what was really going on in the country. I tried and tried, and I gave up eventually. But still, some things bothered me. Like, for instance, let's see. Why do labor unions always demand equal pay for equal work, but never protest equal pay for little or no work? And if all opinions are equally valid, why are conservatives always wrong? And if all cultures are equal, then why doesn't UNESCO organize International Cannibalism Week festivals? And how come a liberal who disagrees with a conservative is open-minded, but a conservative who disagrees with a liberal is a bigot? And ever noticed that in the past 30 years, we've been hearing we have less than 10 years to save the planet? And why is a cloud of deadly gases over a volcano magnificent, but a smokestack over an American factory is ugly and harmful? And I have a lot more, and you can find them on thepeoplescube.com. If you go there, I have an article there titled "The Socratic Questions to Ask the Liberals." After 9/11, I was so shocked that some of people in New York were blaming America for what had happened. I couldn't believe them. These people had no idea what they were talking about. I loved working in the vicinity of the World Trade Center. It was the greatest place in the world. It had a great courtyard. It had musical concerts in the evening. I would always stop on my way home there and listen to the music. It was really nice. And then they destroyed everything. And one of the things that I liked about the World Trade Center was that it was the symbol of the achievement of the American society, of American system, and also the achievement of the Western civilization in general. And the reason why the terrorists were targeting it is exactly that it was the symbol of the Western civilization. And blaming America for what had happened was really insane. I couldn't believe these people. And eventually, at first, I turned my anger towards the Islamic terrorists, but then the more research I did, the more I realized that the real danger was inside this country, that the left that was appeasing the terrorists, that was creating the propagandistic informational logistics for the terrorist ideas to thrive, were much more dangerous to this country. Because the terrorists could only try to destroy it and they could be stopped, but if there is a fifth column inside the country that is destroying it from within, it is much harder to stop them, and they have much more power. So I started doing satire, and once when I lived in the USSR, I used to write short stories and satirical pieces that satirized socialism and the Soviet government. Most of it was never published, of course. But then when I came to America, I thought I would forget about politics and just live as a decent man in a decent society, just make a living and raise a family and not worry about politics. But after 9/11, I figured I couldn't do that because I wouldn't just feel normal if I didn't try to protect this society that I found that I loved so much. I grew to love America. So I started writing again, this time in English, and again satirical pieces, and I'm publishing them in Pajamas Media, where I have my own page. I published them in the American Thinker and some other websites, but most of them are gathered on my satirical website called thepeoplescube.com, which Rush Limbaugh called on his show the Stalinist version of The Onion. It is a spoof of the progressive ideology, and we play the role of the Stalinist commissars discussing the current events that are happening in the United States and the world from the point of view of the old Stalinist Politburo. You can get a lot of mileage out of that. What is the People's Cube? So you know, everybody knows what the Rubik's Cube is. Now imagine a politically correct Rubik's Cube. It would have all sides equal. And of course they will be gloriously red. And every square is equal. But all the players are also equal. No matter how slow or how fast or how smart you are, all the results are equal. It's guaranteed equality of results. And it's also colorblind friendly. As a graphic artist, I do a lot of poster work, and people at tea parties all over the country are printing out artwork from my website, and once in a while I get emails with pictures of the posters, signs that I did that people are carrying in Washington, in Colorado, in other places, in Chicago. My friend Mark here printed one of my posters, and he used it here in Denver during one of the rallies, and it says, "Support class envy. Don't you wish your neighbor's piggy bank looked like this? Redistribute wealth. Vote Democrat." I went to CPAC last winter in February, and one organization was distributing these books. It says Signs from 9/12 and the Tea Parties of 2009. And I started looking at it, and I noticed that there are 5 or 6 posters that I made, printed out by people who never knew who I was, apparently.
How did you master English so well?
I was singing the Beatles songs, playing on the guitar. Well, I went to college also, and I studied languages, but I still knew English better than my fellow students because of that, because of the music.
Yeah, Mark.
Do I understand that your pseudonym is Red Square?
Yes.
So we can go look for Red Square, and that's you.
Comrade Red Square is my pseudonym on thepeoplescube.com. I'm the incarnadine trapezoid there, people's director, and the head of the Department of Visual Agitation and Unanimity. But
If we're looking at other places like Pajamas Media,
that's Oleg Atbashian. Yes, at first I was hiding my name because I didn't want to lose a job in New York, but then I lost it anyway, and so I decided to stop hiding it and started publishing it under my own name, my real name. Google me, and there is an article in Wikipedia that you can find, and some of my articles too.
Well, like you said, when you came to America, you wanted to live as a decent man in a decent country. Then you started to discover things that changed your view of what America is really about. And could you describe to us that process of how you, the illusion that you have about a perfect free country kind of fell from your eyes?
Well, I can give you a long answer. Okay, I'll try to make it short. There were a few things that I noticed. At first, I thought that counting other people's money was something really typical of a socialist society, because when everything is shared, when you share everything with everybody, then you really have to watch over somebody's shoulder and see what the other guy is doing, and whether is he slacking off maybe and making you work harder, because nobody wants to work harder when somebody else is slacking off, so eventually everybody winds up slacking off and nobody winds up working hard. And then if you make some money and decide in this country and decide to take some time off and enjoy life and pursue your hobbies, it's your money, it's not my problem. Now, but if everything is shared and my taxes go to supporting you, then if you decide to stop working and pursue your hobbies, then you will be a parasite in my eyes. And that's what happened in the USSR, because people who didn't work were parasites. And there was no unemployment because everybody was forced to work, whether you wanted it or not. There was a famous case when Joseph Brodsky, a genius poet, a Nobel Prize winner, was accused of being a parasite. There was a show trial in the 60s, and he was convicted as a parasite because he didn't work and they didn't consider his poetry work. Now, that's one thing. So when I noticed that the media was writing about how much money certain people are making, that really surprised me. It was very un-American in my view. But now that the president is talking about people who are earning more than they should, like the corporate jet owners and others, that's really, takes the prize. Another thing is, when I went to my son's school to talk to the headmaster, the principal, rather, I was waiting in the hallway and I noticed the bulletin board with the children's composition on the wall. And those compositions written by 12-year-olds were titled, How I Would Change the American Constitution. And I started reading them and I noticed that every single one contained adding the right to work, the right to housing, the right to medical care, the right to education. And when the principal came over, she looked at me and she beamed. She said, isn't that nice? Aren't our children so smart and nice and kind? And I said, hey, we had all those rights written in the Soviet Constitution and it didn't do anybody any good. So why would we want to change the American Constitution to look like the Soviet Constitution? She said, what's wrong with people having all those rights? I said, well, what's wrong? First of all, in order to be able to enforce those rights, the government has, the whole political system needs to change so that the government would be able to track everybody, first of all. Second of all, the relationship between the people and the government would change. So instead of being free owners of the country, people would be the subject of the government that would be providing them with things. So instead of ensuring that people have the freedom to take care of themselves, the role of the government would be to take care of the people. Now, that's what the traditional view, and that's what makes America separate from the rest of the world, because this philosophy of the government is different. When the government starts providing services, they always come out more expensive and inferior. So we would end up with a new, different political system with inferior services, where everything is more expensive. The government would have to tax everybody and so on. And I gave all these arguments, and she said, you know what? And I said that it's a pity that the teachers are putting such garbage into children's heads. She said, nobody was putting anything into their heads. The children wrote this out of their own kind hearts, and it's a shame that some parents do not share those kind hearts, that kindness with their children. I said, I was a 12-year-old once, and I know that the right to work, the right to education was not on my mind at the time, or the health care or anything. So don't tell me they came out with it by themselves without the teachers' help. Now, and I thought that was just some isolated incident in some certain one separate Brooklyn school. But then I realized that that was a system, and that the role of the public education in this country is to instill all those ideas in the children. All those other things are side effects, like math, sciences, and stuff like that. I know that in Brooklyn College, the teacher's school at Brooklyn College, you have to take an interview and pass a test and prove that you believe in social justice, as Bill Ayers believed in it. Otherwise, you're not fit to be a teacher. So, and Bill Ayers is the guy who's Obama's friend and who's writing all those. If you go to Bill Ayers' website, he's not hiding it. He has Hammer and Sickle and Che Guevara on his front page. And if you go to the list of his works, you will see that it's all about installing or teaching social justice in the classroom. So he's teaching teachers how to put all that garbage into those little skulls full of mush, as Ursula Bush is saying. And I can go on forever, so just don't get me started.
No, I'm enjoying this very much. The Ukraine, what I know about it from here, has a fabulous, rich culture. You look like you might be in my age cohort, age ones. And I'm familiar with the terrible famine that the Ukrainians suffered through. Did any of your family ancestors tell you about this, or was this kind of a blacked out period for many of you?
It was a blackout, and I grew up knowing nothing about it. The government was so good at concealing information. the people were dying in the villages because the government, when they did the collectivization of the villages, they took away all the crops from them and they forced people into collective farms. People without any crops, were left without any food. They were dying of hunger. They were trying to go to the cities, but the government kept them away. They wouldn't let them pass the railway station. So there were just people lying on the benches in the railway station and dying. And they were not let inside the cities. Ukraine used to be the breadbasket of Russia and of Europe. Now, not anymore.
Oleg, I'm very struck by how you and I are sort of mirror images working for the same thing. And you're from the former Soviet Union, come here to argue for capitalism and to defend freedom. I'm from America. I frequently travel to the former Soviet Union and argue for capitalism and try to defend freedom. One of the things that I've noticed, and I'd be curious to get your inputs on, sort of to compare and contrast, at least when I'm over in the Ukraine, particularly also in Russia, I find that the cultural infrastructure is present. When I talk with people about freedom, about being responsible for your own life, about being responsible for your own welfare, that idea is sort of doesn't really have much traction. And I'm curious if you think there's something similar sort of happening here, and that the cultural infrastructure for capitalism is vanishing, or if there are if it's something completely different.
I have to think about that before I answer you completely. As for the former Soviet republics, people grew up there without any concept of individual liberty or private enterprise. Of course, that doesn't mean that people didn't try private enterprise, because it's in our human nature to be better off, to provide for our families, and even though you redistribute everything, there will still be people who are better off just because they are more industrious, they find ways to make more money. On the other hand, in that system, to be entrepreneurial usually meant to do illegal things, because when the private enterprise was outlawed, and you're a private entrepreneur, you're an outlaw. And that involved bribery, that involved theft, corruption, and party leaders were involved in that corruption. It was a very hypocritical system, and everybody knew that. Towards the fall of the USSR, there were hardly any people left who actually believed in communism. There was this big inertia. The society existed just by inertia. And as for this country now, I noticed that due to the wonders of the public education, children are growing without any concept of what you were just talking about, the concepts of responsibility and individual liberty, and they are being prepared to live in a society ruled by the warlords who are trying to take care of the little people. Because they like to say the little guy, the little people. And like Obama was always, Obama once said that he was always keeping the little people in focus. And when he said that, I imagined him when he was a child with a big magnifying glass, pointing it at the ants, and those were the little people he was focusing on. And he continues the same practice right now.
I wondered what you think that the most underappreciated freedom is here in America.
You should have asked me that question beforehand, so I would have time to prepare.
Sorry.
Well, okay, that's a good question. That's a great question, Oleg. Do you need some time?
A lot of small little freedoms were invented for different purposes, but the main basic freedoms are being eroded with all that buildup of smaller freedoms. Now, the basic freedoms that are listed in the Constitution, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and although all those, I think the pursuit of happiness is the most underappreciated one, because that involves a lot of things. When I was lived in the USSR and I had this collectivist education, I believe that when I first heard of these words, pursuit of happiness in the American Constitution, I thought that's really silly. How can you write such things into the Constitution how can you think about pursuing your own happiness when everybody must pursue the happiness of the entire world? We need to think about all the countries. Everybody in your country must be happy. Everybody in the world must be happy. And what's the point of pursuing your own happiness? It's very selfish. And then I realized, with time, the great philosophical value, the depth of that statement, the pursuit of happiness, because that's exactly why we live for, and that's how we can the only happy society is where all the individuals are happy. Our society, where everybody was trying to make everybody else happy in the USSR, wound up very unhappy because it was purported to be a happy society where every individual wasn't happy. A society of happy individuals is happy collectively as well. And you cannot pursue happiness. Nobody can pursue your happiness for you. Only you know what makes you happy. No benevolent bureaucrat in the government can know what you need to be happy. And so the same with voting. Like if you vote, make a vote because you think that that particular politician would be good for the poor or for the minorities, not for you, then some other guy will also vote for something that he thinks will be good for you, but not for him. And eventually, everybody winds up with having a candidate who's not good for anybody at all. So people should vote their own personal interest, and then eventually you wind up with having somebody who represents the interest of most of the people, the real interests, and not the imaginary ones that some ideologue tells you and the media tells you what the interest that you should have.
Yeah, I would like to know what were the exposure when you were in the Ukraine. For instance, Václav Klaus is very well schooled in our founding fathers. What were Václav Klaus, the president of the Czech Republic?
Oh, right.
What were some of your philosophical influences while in the Ukraine, if you had exposure to it, say, i.e., like Frederick Bastiat or John Locke, or any of that available?
None of that was translated, and I just saw the books by Ayn Rand on that table next to my books, which is an honor to me. Her name wasn't even mentioned. In college, we were taught about different bourgeois, the so-called bourgeois ideologues, the philosophers of capitalism, and they were debunking them. But Ayn Rand was not even mentioned there. She was a non-person at all. She didn't exist. I never heard her name until I came to this country. So I didn't have, none of that was translated. None of those people you mentioned were translated. Getting anything in the original was also a very big problem because there was control at the border. Some books were being smuggled, but they mostly wound up in big cities like Moscow or Leningrad. I lived in a small Ukrainian city. It's like a Ukrainian version of Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
What about, say, along the lines of the philosophy you were exposed to any alternative economists at the same time? Because obviously it seems like it would be Karl Marx and those that advocated that central planning idea. I mean, was there any exposure to the Austrian school or any of those guys?
No, absolutely. There was no exposure when I was growing up. Right now, it is possible that there is. Right now, there is freedom and people may be discussing all kinds of things. That doesn't mean that they can implement them because the government is still pretty much corrupt. But one of the things that I realized about socialism that it spreads corruption so deeply that a few generations of people must grow up before all that heritage is kind of forgotten and the system is flushed with that poison. That really poisons the souls, the morale, the morality itself.
Oleg, the liberty movement. Brad Collins here represents a coalition for conservative majority. I represent Liberty in Iraq. There's other organizations throughout this great nation. What's your thoughts on that here, seeing it come to life, especially after Obama's presidency came to realization for us all?
It's the greatest thing that could ever happen. Sometimes I think if it weren't for Bush, there would be no Obama. But then I think if it weren't for Obama, there would be no Tea Parties. And that's a very great thing that happened. And like my friend Mark here told me once that him and I were in the Tea Party before the Tea Parties. He had pictures to prove it. I was standing at the Denver convention in 2008 with a sign like this. on a stage, and he was taking pictures of me then. That was before the Tea Parties.
The first single protest in America against Obama. This
Right, that was right as Obama was delivering his speech
at the Denver
at the convention.
at the DNC in 2008, they had a parking lot which was called the Freedom Cage. You were supposed to go there and give your protests. It's completely empty.
Right.
They had a live mic that echoed through the neighborhood, and Obama Oleg did a protest with signs against Obama.
Right, and then I sang, "It's now or never."
Right. Oleg sang Elvis impressions in between his speeches and signs, and the only audience were large groups of police in riot gear.
And they were applauding. They loved it.
Yeah, they had these vehicles that they ride on the sides of, and they were all applauding Oleg's imitations of
Elvis.
Sorry. First of all, I can recommend this book for people that have, like me, that pick up 100 books and never finish them. It's only 120 pages, very engrossing, and I'd like to recommend it. It's my first book I finished in like 20 years. So highly recommend it. There's one particular paragraph that interested me. That you talked about, this is the collectivist talking. It says, they might be even more surprised to learn that the evil corporations are their best allies, both politically and culturally. The big corporations are some of the biggest champions of state-regulated entitlement programs and labor wage hikes. And this interested me, and I wondered if you had some examples of that.
Well, first of all, I came with that notion when I was reading an article on the affirmative action that some liberal author was arguing that it must be good for business because a lot of big corporations, like the GE, American Express, and others, were sponsoring it. They were saying that it's really good for us. But then I realized that when the big corporations can really swallow the cost, it's easier for them than it is for the small and the medium-sized businesses. And then it's really good for big corporations because that takes care of the competition. That clears the playing field for them. Because the liberals always like to talk about leveling the playing field, but what they actually do is clearing it for their buddies, for their contributors, for their sponsors. Then there is another thing with the unions, because again, a small company will suffocate with the union regulations. A big corporations can handle it. They'll just raise the cost of their goods, and if it's closer to a monopoly, especially that the government sometimes gives monopolies to corporations in certain states, then they will have no competition and they can do whatever they want with the prices. So there are just a few examples. And speaking of leveling the playing field, it is basically a description of a rigged game.
Okay, so this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, the pursuit of happiness. So I believe some people are called to be politicians, and I think that that's their job, so they have a right to advertise it. At what point does government advertising become propaganda?
Well, you remember how the Obama administration were trying to create a system where the National Endowment for the Arts would be an instrument for propaganda in order to pay the artists willing to create propaganda pieces for the healthcare reform and some other things. And actually, I don't think art should be subsidized at all, because if you look at history, art flourished mostly when the free market, when those artists were living by the rules of the free market. Government subsidies to the art lead to stagnation and laziness and just degradation of thought and feeling and everything.
When you look at the susceptibility of the American public to Marxist ideology, What is it about it that's so seductive?
I mentioned some of that in my book. The underlying idea is the economic equality. And for them, economic equality seems to be like a very worthy goal. To me, it's more like an optical illusion. It's like a mirage that you follow eventually until you fall off the cliff. And you never achieve it because economic equality is impossible. We're all different. We're all born with different traits, with different height, with different hair color, different kind of voice, and different talents. Some people like music and they want to be musicians. And they pursue that at the expense of making money in some other more productive career. Some people like more money more and they go into business and they become managers and they make more money. That doesn't mean that they are criminals and they owe anybody else just because they work harder. Now, the left finds those seductive ideas of economic equality so good that they do not, they think that sacrificing a man or two to that idea, to such a great future, is a small price to pay. And when there is you sacrifice one, you sacrifice 10, you sacrifice 100, then you sacrifice a group, you sacrifice a whole ethnic group, you sacrifice a nation, and those sacrifices never end. Notice how Obama likes to talk about sacrifice. He says everybody needs to sacrifice. Americans need to learn to sacrifice. Sacrifice is a key word. It's a code word. Yeah, you need to sacrifice. But what I'm saying is that keeping economic inequality in our society is a small price to pay to remain decent human beings living in a decent, productive, prosperous society that is ruled by law and morality.
I want to take this opportunity to promote Oleg's book. It's $12. He's going to stick around for just a little bit, I believe, to sign them here for you.